The age of my dominion is a ghost, a whisper of frosted wind across the desolate plains of my former kingdom. The stones of Carn-Dûm are scattered, their sharp edges softened by the relentless passage of time, their cold memory a testament to the power that once resided there. I am a shadow, a name invoked in hushed tones by those who still fear the dark, a lesson taught to wide-eyed children about the perils of ambition. I am a footnote in the grand tapestry of the ages, a villain vanquished, a prophecy fulfilled. But I was more. I was a king. I was a sorcerer of renown, a student of the arts that delve deeper than the surface of the world, into the very marrow of its being. I was a will of iron, a mind as sharp as any blade. And I was the Witch-King of Angmar. My story did not begin with the shriek of a Nazgûl, nor with the chill of the wraith world. It began, as so many tales of fall do, with the sun on my face and the weight of a crown upon my brow. I was a lord of men, one of the great ones who had sailed from the ruin of our ancestral home, that island of tragic splendor that dared to challenge the very gods. We, the king's men, had sought new lands to rule, to build anew the glory of our heritage. And I was among the most ambitious, the most driven. My kingdom was a testament to my strength, a bastion of order in a world that teetered on the precipice of chaos. My people prospered under my firm hand, and my name was one of respect and, yes, of fear. For I knew that power was the only true currency of the world, the only shield against the encroaching darkness. But the darkness has a way of seeping through the cracks of even the most formidable defenses. It is a patient predator, a silent tide that erodes the foundations of greatness. My first encounter with it was not as a monstrous foe, but as a subtle whisper, a promise of something more. He came to me not in his terrible majesty, not as the Dark Lord of Mordor, but as a giver of gifts, a being of immense knowledge and power who saw in me a kindred spirit. He spoke of order, of a world united under a single, unwavering will, a world free from the petty squabbles and the fleeting passions of lesser men. He offered me a means to achieve this, a way to transcend the limitations of my mortal flesh, to become something more than just a king. He offered me a ring. It was a beautiful thing, wrought of a strange, dark metal, and set with a single, compelling stone that seemed to drink the light. When I first slipped it upon my finger, I felt a surge of power unlike anything I had ever known. My senses sharpened, my command over the unseen arts deepened, and the years seemed to fall away from me like a discarded cloak. I could perceive the secret thoughts of men, their hidden desires and fears, and I could bend them to my will. The ring gave me the strength to expand my kingdom, to crush my enemies, to build a legacy that would endure for all time. But the ring was a gilded cage, a beautiful lie. With each passing year, its influence grew, its whispers becoming a constant, insidious murmur in the back of my mind. The world of sunlight and vibrant color began to fade, replaced by a gray, shadow-haunted realm where only the stark realities of power and despair held sway. My physical form attenuated, my flesh becoming a translucent veil over the burning fire of my will. I was no longer a king of men, but something else entirely, something bound to the will of another. I had become one of the Nazgûl, the ring wraiths, the most terrible servants of the Dark Lord. And I, who had been a king, was now the greatest of them. My name was lost to time, my face a forgotten memory. I was the Witch-King, the Lord of the Nazgûl, the captain of a host of despair. And my long, twilight war against the world of men had just begun. The change was not instantaneous, not a sudden plunge into darkness. It was a gradual descent, a slow, cold sunrise of a new and terrible reality. The ring on my finger, at first a source of exhilarating power, became a conduit, a channel through which the will of my new master flowed into me, reshaping my very essence. The sun, once a welcome sight, became a harsh glare, its warmth a searing pain. The vibrant hues of the world leached away, leaving behind a monochrome landscape of shadows and shifting forms. It was in this gray twilight that I learned to see, to perceive the world not as it was, but as it truly is, a realm of fleeting hopes and enduring fears, a stage for the eternal struggle between the light and the all-consuming dark. My fellow ring-bearers, the other 8, underwent a similar transformation. They too had been great men in their time, kings, sorcerers, and warriors of renown, each with their own ambitions, their own desires. Now, they were my brethren in this new, shadowy existence, their individual wills subsumed into the collective purpose that our Master had ordained for us. We were the Nazgûl, the 9, and I was their lord. A silent council of despair, we gathered in the shadows of Mordor, our very presence a blight upon the land. Our Master, the giver of our rings, had been defeated, his physical form destroyed in the war against the last alliance of elves and men. But his spirit endured, a burning ember of malice in the heart of his dark land, and we, his most potent servants, were bound to him, awaiting his return. For long ages, we lay dormant, our power curtailed by the absence of the one ring, the master ring that controlled all others. The world outside our shadowy realm went on, ignorant of the threat that festered in the east. The kingdoms of men, the proud descendants of those who had defeated our master, grew complacent in their long peace. They forgot the taste of true fear, the chilling touch of a despair that leached the courage from a warrior's heart. It was a forgetfulness that we would exploit to its fullest extent. When the time was right, when the shadow of our master began to stir once more in the dark fortress of Dol Guldur, I was dispatched to the north. My mission was to sow discord and ruin among the Dunedain, the men of the west, the heirs of the kingdom of Arnor. This was a task I undertook with a cold and patient fury. The blood of Númenor ran in their veins, the same blood that had once flowed in mine. But they were of the line of Elendil, the faithful who had opposed the will of the king's men, and their very existence was an affront to the new order I served. I established my own kingdom in the frozen north, a realm of shadow and ice that would come to be known in the fearful whispers of men as Angmar. From my fortress of Carn Dûm, a name that would become synonymous with dread, I gathered to me all manner of evil creatures, orcs, trolls, and fell spirits, as well as men who had fallen to the allure of the dark. My power grew, a chilling mist that crept southward, enveloping the lands of the Dunedain. I did not wage a war of open conquest, not at first. My methods were more insidious, more in keeping with the nature of the shadow I now served. I fanned the flames of dissent among the 3 kingdoms into which Arnor had been divided, Arthedain, Cardolan, and Rudar. I whispered promises of power to ambitious lords, turning brother against brother, until the once great kingdom of the north was a fractured and squabbling land. In Rudar, I found fertile ground for my seeds of corruption. The Dunedain were few there, and the hillmen who populated the land were easily swayed by promises of wealth and dominion. I installed a puppet king on the throne of Rudar, a man whose heart was as black as the mountains of his land. Through him, I turned Rhudaur into a vassal state of Angmar, a dagger pointed at the heart of the remaining northern kingdoms. Cardolan, with its vast and empty plains, was the next to feel my cold embrace. I did not need to conquer it with armies. A great plague, a sickness that withered the body and stole the breath, swept through the land, leaving it desolate and empty. And into the barrows where the dead of Cardolan were laid to rest, I sent evil spirits from Angmar, spirits that animated the lifeless bones and turned the sacred tombs into places of unspeakable horror. The Barrow Downs, once a place of reverence, became a land of waking nightmare, a silent and terrifying monument to my power. Only Arthedain, the last bastion of the Dunedain in the north, remained. And against Arthedain I unleashed the full fury of my armies. For centuries, the war raged, a long and brutal conflict that bled the North white. I remember the clash of steel, the screams of the dying, the satisfying crunch of bone under the mace of a troll. I remember the look of terror in the eyes of the Dunedain as their shining armor was sullied with the black blood of my orcs. I remember the fall of Fornost, the last great city of the North Kingdom. I rode at the head of my legions, a figure of black dread upon a steed of shadow. The gates of the city were splintered, its walls breached, and its defenders scattered like leaves before a storm. The last king of Arthedain, a man of courage but of little hope, fled before me, his kingdom in ruins, his people a scattered and broken remnant. I had achieved my master's purpose. The North Kingdom was no more. The heirs of Elendil were reduced to a landless wandering folk, their glory a fading memory. The victory was sweet, a cold and satisfying draught that did little to quench the eternal thirst of my fated spirit. But in the moment of my triumph, a new enemy appeared on the horizon, a foe that would prove to be more formidable than the broken armies of Arnor. The ships of Gondor, the south kingdom of the Dunedain, arrived like a storm out of the west, their white sails a stark and defiant contrast to the gray skies of my victory. They came in answer to the desperate pleas of their northern kin, a day too late to save the kingdom, but not too late for vengeance. With them came the elves of Lindon, their ancient enmity for my master rekindled by the ruin I had wrought. I watched from the captured walls of Fornost as their host assembled on the plains below, a glittering sea of steel and defiance. At their head rode Eärnur, the Prince of Gondor, a man of fiery spirit and reckless courage. And with him rode another, an elf lord of great power, his presence a searing light in my shadowy perception. His name was Glorfindel, and the light of the two trees of Valinor still lingered in his eyes, a light that was anathema to me and all that I had become. I did not fear them. Fear was a mortal emotion, a weakness I had long since discarded. But I felt a cold surge of hatred, a deep and abiding loathing for the light they represented, for the hope that flickered in their hearts. I led my victorious armies out to meet them, confident in my strength, in the terror that was my greatest weapon. The battle that followed was a maelstrom of violence, a clash of darkness and light on the windswept plains of the north. My orcs, emboldened by their recent victory, threw themselves at the disciplined ranks of Gondor, only to be broken like waves against a rocky shore. The trolls of the cold mountains, creatures of immense strength and brutish savagery, were brought down by the swift arrows and keen blades of the elves. The hillmen of Rhudaur, my erstwhile allies, wavered and broke, their courage failing them in the face of such a determined foe. I rode through the chaos of the battle, a vortex of despair at the heart of the storm. My presence alone was enough to unman the bravest of my enemies. Their horses shied away from me, their eyes rolling in terror. Their sword arms grew heavy, their hearts filled with a nameless dread. I was the embodiment of their deepest fears, the whisper of the void that awaited them all. I sought out the Prince of Gondor, Eärnur, his bright banner, a beacon in the swirling melee. I would break him, and in breaking him, I would shatter the morale of his army. I charged at him, my black steed moving with an unnatural speed, my cry a sound of utter desolation that ripped the air. But as I closed in for the kill, the elf lord Glorfindel intervened. He rode a white horse that seemed to burn with an inner fire, and in his hand he held a sword that shone with a cold, clear light. The light was a torment, a searing agony that drove me back. The elf lord did not speak, but his eyes held a power that I could not withstand. My steed reared, its shadowy form dissolving into mist, and I was thrown to the ground. For a moment, I lay there, the din of the battle fading into a distant roar, the world a blur of gray and pain. Then, my will asserted itself, and I rose, a pillar of black rage against the fading light. My army was broken, my victory turned to ashes, but my mission was accomplished. The North Kingdom was destroyed, and the line of its kings was brought to ruin. I retreated from the field, a shadowy wraith fleeing the light, the mocking laughter of the Gondorian prince echoing in my ears. But it was the words of the elf lord, spoken not to me but to Eärnur, that would follow me down through the long years of my shadowy existence. "Do not pursue him," Glorfindel had said, his voice clear and ringing with a strange authority. "Far off yet is his doom, and not by the hand of man will he fall." A prophecy, a challenge, a sliver of cold comfort in the bitter sting of my defeat. I, who had shed my mortality, was now bound by a fate foretold by one of the firstborn. It was a thought that I would ponder in the long, dark years to come, a riddle that would not be solved until the very end of my long and terrible road. After the humbling light of the elf lord drove me from the fields of Fornost, I retreated into the shadows, a wounded predator licking its wound. Angmar, my great northern bastion, was shattered, its armies scattered, its power broken. But I had succeeded in my primary objective. The kingdom of Arnor was no more, a ghost of its former glory. The Dunedain of the north were a broken and scattered people, their kings reduced to chieftains of a wandering folk. A long and quiet darkness fell upon the lands of Eriador, a silence born of my patient, malevolent work. I returned to Mordor, to the land of shadow where my master's will held absolute sway. The other 8 were there, their spectral forms waiting in the gloom. Our power was still diminished, our strength tied to the fate of the One Ring, which remained lost to us. But the eye was ever watchful, its gaze piercing the veil of the world, searching, always searching. The years bled into one another, a long and featureless expanse of time marked only by the slow, inexorable growth of our master's power. He had taken root in the fortress of Dol Guldur in the south of Mirkwood, and from there his influence spread like a creeping sickness. The forest grew dark and tangled, its paths treacherous, its air thick with fear. The shadow was returning to the world, and we, the Nazgûl, were its heralds. From the accursed city of Minas Morgul, the tower of sorcery that had once been the fair city of Minas Ithil, I watched the world of men. The city stood as a perpetual mockery of Gondor's pride, its luminous walls now a ghastly, corpse-light green, its gates a silent scream of despair. It was from this grim perch that I would launch the next phase of our long war. The line of kings in Gondor had failed. The last of them, that same foolishly valiant Aernur who had taunted me on the fields of Fornost, had ridden to his doom. I had sent him a challenge, a taunt to his pride, and he, against all counsel, had accepted. He rode alone to the gates of Minas Morgul, and he was never seen again. Thus ended the line of Anarion in the south, another victory for the shadow, another step towards the dominion that my master craved. The world slumbered on, largely unaware of the gathering storm. The wise, the council of elves and wizards, knew that the shadow was stirring, but they did not yet comprehend the full extent of its power, the true identity of the necromancer of Dol Guldur. They drove our master from his stronghold in Mirkwood, a temporary victory that served only to hasten his return to Mordor. He came back to his ancient land openly, his power declared, his intentions made clear. The Dark Tower of Barad-dûr was rebuilt, its foundations rooted in the very despair of the world. The furnaces of Mordor were rekindled, their black smoke blotting out the sun. The armies of the orcs were bred and marshaled, their guttural war chants echoing in the desolate valleys. And we, the Nine, were made whole again. Our power was restored, our purpose renewed. The search for the One Ring, the key to our master's ultimate victory, began in earnest. The news came to us through whispers and spies, through the tortured cries of those who fell into our clutches. The ring had been found. It had been held for a time by a creature of the river folk, a wretched thing that had been twisted and consumed by its power. And now it was in the possession of a hobbit, a creature of the Shire, a land of gentle hills and peaceful folk who knew nothing of the great and terrible world beyond their borders. The absurdity of it was not lost on me. The fate of the world, the culmination of our master's grand design, rested on the finding of a single, insignificant creature in a forgotten corner of the world. But the master's command was absolute. The ring must be found. I led the Nine in the hunt. We rode forth from Mordor, cloaked in black, our forms unseen by mortal eyes, our presence a wave of terror that preceded us. We were the Black Riders, a name that would be whispered in fear in the inns and villages of the West. The sun was our enemy, its light a searing pain. But we rode on, driven by the relentless will of our master. Our search took us across the vast plains of Rohan, through the Gap of Isen, and into the lonely lands of Eriador. We were guided by a strange and maddeningly elusive trail, the scent of the ring, a faint and tantalizing whisper on the wind. We questioned those we met, our voices the sound of rustling leaves and grating stone, our questions planting seeds of terror that would blossom into nightmares. In the village of Bree, we came close, so close. The ring-bearer was there, in an inn filled with the boisterous and the ignorant. But he was aided by one of the Dúnedain, a ranger of the north, one of the scattered remnants of the kingdom I had destroyed so long ago. The irony was not lost on me. The heirs of the kings I had cast down were now the protectors of the very thing that could ensure my ultimate triumph. The chase led us to the ancient watchtower of Amon Sul, the place they called Weathertop. We cornered them there, on that lonely, windswept hill. The hobbit, a creature of surprising resilience, stood before me, his small face a mask of fear and defiance. I saw the ring on his finger, its power a faint but undeniable shimmer in the wraith world. I reached for him. My touch the chill of the grave, and I pierced him with a Morgul blade, a sliver of cursed metal that would deliver him into our shadowy realm. But the ranger, this heir of a fallen kingdom, fought with a desperate ferocity. He wielded fire, a weapon that even we, the deathless, still feared. He drove us back, and the hobbit, though wounded, escaped us. The victory was incomplete, the prize still beyond our grasp. But the wound I had dealt him would do its work. The poison of the Morgul blade was in his veins, slowly, inexorably drawing him into the world of shadows, into my domain. The hunt continued, a desperate race to the one place the hobbit might find refuge. The hidden valley of Rivendell, the home of the elf lord Elrond. We pursued them relentlessly, our black steeds tireless, our cries of despair echoing in the hills. At the ford of Bruinen, the very border of the elven sanctuary, we had them trapped. The hobbit, pale and fading, was at the river's edge, the water a barrier he could not cross. I rode into the shallows, the other 8 behind me, our victory seemingly assured. I could feel the pull of the ring, the weakness of the hobbit's spirit, the final, shuddering surrender that was about to take place. But the power of the elves was strong in that place. The river, at the command of the elf lord, rose up in a mighty flood, a torrent of white water in the shape of charging horses. It crashed down upon us, its force a physical blow, its purity a searing agony. Our horses were swept away, their forms dissolving into the raging current. Our own physical forms were broken, our connection to the world of the living severed. We were scattered, disembodied, our wills cast back to the darkness of Mordor. We had failed. The ring was safe, for now, in the one place we could not reach it. The rage of our master was a palpable thing, a storm of fury that lashed the very foundations of Barad-dûr. But failure was not the end. It was merely a delay. We would be reclothed, given new forms, new steeds of terror. The war was far from over. It was about to begin in earnest. And I, the Witch-King of Angmar, would be at its forefront, a harbinger of the storm that would break upon the world of men. From the ashes of my defeat at the ford of Bruinen, I was reborn. Not in flesh, for that I had long since forsaken, but in shadow and in malice. My master's will drew my scattered essence back to the furnaces of Mordor, and there I was reclothed, given a new and more terrible form. I was no longer a rider in black, a furtive hunter in the wilderness. I was a commander of armies, a king of despair, and my throne was the citadel of Minas Morgul. My steed was no longer a horse of flesh and blood, but a winged creature of ancient evil, a fell beast of leathered wings and hooked beak, its cry a shriek that could curdle the blood and shatter the will of the stoutest warrior. On this monstrous mount, I became a terror of the skies, a harbinger of the war to come. The world was poised on the brink of a new age, an age that would be forged in the fires of our master's ambition. The pieces were in place. The forces of darkness were marshaled. The free peoples of Middle-earth, fragmented and unprepared, were about to face the greatest test of their long and troubled history. From my perch in the Morgul Vale, I watched the last bastion of the Dúnedain, the proud city of Minas Tirith, the white city of Gondor. It stood as a defiant beacon of light against the encroaching shadow, a symbol of the old world that we were destined to destroy. The city was my primary objective, its fall the key to the breaking of the West. I began the assault with a probing attack on the ruined city of Osgiliath, the ancient capital of Gondor that straddled the great river Anduin. My armies, a vast horde of orcs and trolls, swarmed across the river, their numbers overwhelming the small garrison of Gondorian soldiers who stood against them. I led the attack from the sky, my winged beast casting a shadow of fear over the battlefield. The defenders, their courage failing them at the sight of me, broke and fled. Osgiliath fell, and the way to Minas Tirith was open. The Master's plan was unfolding perfectly. While the main force of our armies prepared for the final assault on Gondor, another front was opened in the north. The wizard Saruman, a being of great power who had fallen to the allure of the ring, had declared himself for our cause. His armies of Uruk-hai, a new and more terrible breed of orc, were unleashed upon the land of Rohan, the Horse Lords, who were the staunchest allies of Gondor. The aim was to neutralize Rohan, to prevent them from coming to Gondor's aid in its hour of need. But the Free Peoples were not as weak as we had supposed. The wizard Gandalf, a persistent thorn in our side, rallied the forces of Rohan. The king of the Horse Lords, who had been ensnared by the treacherous counsel of Saruman's spy, was freed from his enchantment. At the fortress of Helm's Deep, Saruman's army was broken. A surprising and irritating setback, but not a fatal one to our grand design. And the ring, the object of our long and frustrating hunt, was on the move. The Hobbit, the insignificant creature who had slipped through our grasp, was making his way to Mordor on a desperate and foolhardy quest to destroy the very source of our power. The thought was preposterous, an act of such audacious folly that it was almost beneath our consideration. But the eye was aware of him, its gaze drawn to the east, and the defenses of Mordor were strengthened. My focus, however, remained on Gondor. The time had come for the final stroke, the blow that would shatter the world of men. A great army, the largest ever assembled in the history of Middle-earth, poured forth from the Black Gate and from the Morgul Vale. It was a tide of blackness, a legion of orcs, trolls, and evil men, swarming across the despoiled fields of Ithilien and onto the Pelennor, the great green fields before Minas Tirith. I led this vast host, a specter of death on my winged steed. The sky above the city was blotted out by a great darkness of our own making, a storm of despair that mirrored the tempest in the hearts of the city's defenders. The siege of Minas Tirith began. Our siege towers, great black engines of war, crawled towards the city walls. Our catapults hurled not only stone, but the severed heads of the soldiers we had slain in Osgiliath, a gruesome message of the fate that awaited all who defied us. The city was strong, its walls built by the hands of the Númenóreans of old. But its defenders were few, their hope dwindling with each passing hour. The gate, the main gate of the White City, was our primary target. We brought forth Grond, the great battering ram forged in the furnaces of Barad-dûr, a beast of iron and sorcery in the shape of a ravening wolf. It hammered against the gate, its every blow augmented by my own will, by the spells of ruin that I cast upon the ancient stones. The gate splintered, it cracked, and with a final thunderous crash, it broke. The way was open. I passed through the shattered gateway, the first of our host to enter the city of our enemies. The defenders fell back before me, their faces pale with a terror that was beyond the fear of mere death. In the courtyard beyond the gate, a lone figure stood against me. It was the wizard Gandalf, mounted on his white horse, his face grim and determined. He was a being of immense power, a servant of the secret fire. But in that moment, in the heart of the city I was about to conquer, my own power was at its zenith. "You cannot enter here," he said, his voice a challenge against the din of the approaching battle. "Go back to the abyss, prepared for you and your master." I laughed, a sound that was the scraping of stone on stone, the rustle of dry, dead leaves. I raised my great sword, and it burst into flame, a fire of shadow, and of cold. "Old fool," I hissed. "This is my hour. Die now and curse in vain." Our wills clashed, a silent, titanic struggle of power that made the very stones of the courtyard tremble. For a moment, we were locked in a stalemate, a balance of light and darkness. But then, a sound from the fields beyond the city broke the spell, a sound that was both unexpected and unwelcome. The horns of Rohan, blowing a clear and defiant challenge to the storm of our despair. The horse lords had come. They had broken through our lines, their charge a thunderous wave of courage that swept across the Pelennor fields. My moment of triumph in the city was stolen from me. The greater battle, the fate of the war, was being decided on the fields outside the walls. I turned from the wizard, my winged steed carrying me back into the heart of the fray. The final act of my long and terrible story was about to be written. I soared above the maelstrom of the Pelennor, a whirlwind of death and despair. The charge of the Rohirrim had been a stunning blow, a surge of unexpected valor that had thrown our legions into disarray. But my presence, the shadow of my wings, the terror of my cry, was enough to turn the tide. I was the lord of this battlefield, the master of its fear. I saw him then, across the churning chaos of the fields, a speck of gold and white against a canvas of mud and blood. The king of the horse lords, Theoden. His name was a whisper I had heard from the lips of tortured spies and the gibbering mouths of orc scouts. A king pulled back from the brink of dotage and despair by the meddling of the Astari. Now, he rode as if the fire of youth had been rekindled in his veins, his white hair a banner of defiance streaming behind him, his golden shield catching a stray glint of the hopeless dawn we had permitted. He was a force, a vortex of mortal courage around which his riders rallied. His sword, Harugrim, rose and fell, a flash of silver light in the gloom, and with every stroke, one of my lesser servants would fall, its black blood steaming on the churned earth. His voice, hoarse with battle cries, was a roar of encouragement, a sound that cut through the cacophony of shrieking orcs and dying men, a sound of hope. And hope was the enemy. Hope was the great poison of the mortal world, the delusion that kept them fighting when reason dictated they should surrender. It was a fleeting warmth in an encroaching, eternal winter. My entire existence, the long and patient work of centuries, had been dedicated to the singular purpose of extinguishing such flickers. From the slow strangulation of the North Kingdom to the breaking of Gondor's gate, my every action had been a lesson in the futility of hope, a sermon on the inevitability of despair. This king, this symbol of a momentary, valiant resurgence, was an affront to the fundamental truth of the world as my master and I understood it. He was not merely a military target, a strategic piece to be removed from the board. He was an idea, a living, breathing blasphemy against the encroaching night. And it was my sacred, terrible duty to personally make an example of him, to shatter the symbol in the sight of all who drew strength from it. My will, cold and absolute, resonated with the creature upon which I rode. The fell beast, a relic of a forgotten, more primal age, answered not to reins or spoken commands, but to the direct impulse of my thought. It banked in the sky, its vast, leathery wings catching the foul air, turning from its leisurely circle of terror above the fray. I felt the muscles bunch beneath its hide, a gathering of immense power for the final, decisive stoop. Below us, the battle was a tapestry woven from threads of desperation and slaughter. I saw the geometric precision of the Rohirrim's charge beginning to fray at the edges, their momentum slowing as they were swallowed by the sheer, inexhaustible numbers of our host. The Haradrim, the men of the south, with their strange red banners and their monstrous Mumakil, were beginning to press the advantage on the eastern flank. The battle was turning, slowly, grindingly, in our favor, as it always would. But the death of the king would hasten the end. It would be the stroke that broke the spine of the resistance, the stone that starts the avalanche of fear. I focused my unseen gaze upon Theoden. In the gray twilight of the wraith world, I saw him not just as a figure in armor, but as a flickering, defiant flame of life. His spirit burned brightly, a torch against the gloom, fueled by a reckless courage that I had once, in another lifetime, perhaps understood. Now, I saw it only as a flaw, a weakness to be exploited. He was so focused on the small victories before him, on the orc he was about to cleave, that he had forgotten the heavens. Mortals so often did. Their gaze was ever fixed on the earth, on the mud and the blood, while their true doom gathered in the sky above. I descended upon him like a bolt of black lightning, a shadow falling from a sunless sky. The descent was a symphony of terror, an art form I had perfected over countless ages. It began with the sound, a high-pitched, piercing shriek that my mount unleashed upon the world below, a sound designed by ancient malice to bypass the ears and strike directly at the soul. It was the sound of ultimate dread, of rending flesh and breaking minds. I felt the wave of it wash over the battlefield, saw its effect as clearly as if it were a physical force. Men screamed and clutched their ears, their faces pale and slick with sweat. Horses, creatures more attuned to the unseen world, went mad with a primal fear. They bucked and reared, throwing their riders, their eyes rolling white in their heads as they bolted, trampling friend and foe alike in their mindless flight from a horror they could not comprehend. The king's own mount, a great white stallion named Snowmane, a beast of proud lineage and renowned courage, was not immune. It heard the cry, and its valiant heart was turned to water. The horse screamed, a sound of pure animal terror, and reared up, its hooves lashing the air. The king, caught unawares, fought to control the maddened beast, but it was a battle already lost. The black shadow of my descending form enveloped them, a personal eclipse that stole the last vestiges of light and hope. The horse fell backward, a great, shuddering mass of white flesh and broken spirit, and the king, his leg trapped beneath the weight, went down with it. There was a sickening crunch, a sound that was lost in the greater din of the battle, but was as clear as a bell to my sharpened senses. The golden banner of Rohan was extinguished in the mud. The defiant flame of Theoden, king of the Mark, was crushed. I landed amidst the ensuing chaos, my fell beast striking the ground with a force that shook the earth. It folded its vast wings, its reptilian head swiveling, its red eyes glowing with a malevolent intelligence. The circle of fear around me was absolute. My own orcs, creatures born of shadow and malice, shrank back from my presence. The men of Rohan who had been near their king were either dead, scattered, or paralyzed by a dread so profound it was a physical malady. I stood there for a moment, a towering figure of black armor and unseen menace, a void in the shape of a king. My mace, a weapon of immense weight and crushing power, was held loosely in my gauntleted hand. The air around me grew cold, the very light seeming to bend and wither at my presence. Before me lay the broken body of the king, pinned beneath his dead steed. His lifelight was fading rapidly, a guttering candle flame about to be extinguished. The symbol was shattered. The deed was done. All that remained was to deliver the final, contemptuous blow, a coup de grace that would serve as a final punctuation mark on this lesson of despair. The king's royal guard, his hearth troop, had been broken and scattered by the sheer, mind-breaking terror of my arrival. Their horses had carried them away in a blind panic, and their will to return was frozen by the aura of dread that I exuded as naturally as a corpse exudes the stench of decay. All had fled. All save one. A lone warrior stood over the fallen body of the king, a shield in one hand, a sword in the other. They were of a slighter build than the other Rohirrim, yet they stood firm, a solitary point of defiance in a world that had crumbled around them. A rider of Rohan, a mere man, daring to stand between me and my rightful prey. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of it was almost amusing, a spark of ludicrous folly in the grand, grim theater of war. I could have slain this creature from the back of my mount, a casual swat like a man crushing an insect, but this merited a more personal touch. I dismounted, my iron-shod boots sinking into the blood-soaked ground, and took a slow, deliberate step forward. The warrior did not flinch. "Begone, foul Dwemer-like, Lord of Carrion," the rider's voice cried out. It was a voice that was clear and defiant, yet I could hear the tremor beneath it, the frantic, hammering pulse of a mortal heart drowning in a sea of supernatural fear. "Leave the dead in peace." Dwemer-like, a name from the rustic lexicon of the horsefolk, a word for a specter, a work of necromancy. How small their words were. How inadequate to describe the sheer, timeless majesty of my being. I looked upon this lone defender, this tiny bastion of fleeting courage, and a cold amusement stirred within my shadowy consciousness. Peace. They spoke of peace in the midst of a war that would unmake their world. They sought to protect the body of a king whose soul was already slipping into the great, grasping dark. The ignorance of mortals was a constant source of bleak satisfaction. "Come not between the Nazgûl and his prey," I hissed. My voice was not like the voices of men. It was the sound of the grave, of rustling leaves on a forgotten tomb, of grating stone and the sibilant whisper of the void. The words themselves were imbued with power, with the chilling weight of my ancient will. "Or he will not slay thee in thy turn. He will bear thee away to the houses of lamentation, beyond all darkness, where thy flesh shall be devoured, and thy shriveled mind be left naked to the lidless eye." It was not an idle threat. It was a promise, a glimpse into the eternity of torment that awaited any who defied the will of Sauron. I had presided over such houses of lamentation. I had heard the screams that echoed for eternity in the lightless chambers of Barad-dûr. I knew with an intimate certainty the precise manner in which a mortal mind, so full of its petty hopes and cherished memories, could be unraveled thread by thread, leaving only a naked, gibbering awareness of its own unending agony. The rider did not move. Their shield, emblazoned with the white horse of their land, remained held steady. Their sword point did not waver. "Do what you will, but I will hinder you, if I may." If I may. The words were so small, so humble, yet so profoundly insolent. Hinder me? This flickering candle flame intended to hinder a storm that had extinguished suns? The amusement I felt was vast and cold, a glacier of contempt. I was the Witch-King of Angmar, Lord of the Nazgûl, the greatest of the Nine. I had laid waste to the kingdom of Arnor. I had conversed with my master in the halls of the Dark Tower. I had commanded legions that had broken the might of Gondor. And this solitary soldier, this mote of dust on the plains of war, spoke of hindrance. "Hinder me?" I repeated, my voice dripping with the venom of 1,000 years of scorn. "Thou fool! No living man may hinder me." And as I spoke the words, the ancient prophecy echoed in the silent chambers of my mind, as clear as the day I first learned of it. It had been after my defeat at Fornost, a temporary and strategic retreat that the fools of Gondor and the elves had celebrated as a great victory. The elf lord Glorfindel, a being of searing light whose memory was still a faint irritation, had spoken the words to the arrogant Prince Eärnur, who had wished to pursue me. Spies had brought the words to me, a prize from the enemy's camp. Far off yet is his doom, and not by the hand of man will he fall. For long centuries I had carried those words with me. They were not a curse, but a gift, a shield of invincibility, a guarantee from one of my most ancient enemies that my reign was eternal, my being inviolable by the race of men, the primary inhabitants of this world we sought to dominate. The prophecy had fed my arrogance, nurtured my power, confirmed my own belief in my transcendence. I was beyond the petty cycles of life and death that governed the mortal world. I was a fixed point of despair in a turning age. This foolish mortal standing before me with his sword and his misplaced courage was a living embodiment of the prophecy's truth. He could not hinder me. He could not harm me. He could not touch me. His existence was a prelude to his meaningless death. He was nothing. Then, a strange and utterly unexpected thing happened. Something that fell so far outside the calculus of my long and terrible experience that it took a moment for my consciousness to process it. The writer laughed. It was not a laugh of mirth or of madness. It was a sound that was both grim and strangely, chillingly beautiful, like the cracking of ice over a deep and dark river. But no living man am I. The voice that spoke was the same, yet different. The defiance was still there, but now it was sharp and clear, stripped of the trembling undertone I had noted before. With a swift, fluid motion, the writer reached up and pulled the helmet from their head. A cascade of golden hair, long and bright, spilled forth, catching the dim light like a sudden sunrise. The face that was revealed was not the weathered, grim face of a soldier of the Rittermark. It was the face of a woman, pale and stern, her eyes filled with a grief and a fury that burned with a cold, clear fire. "You look upon a woman, Eowyn I am, Eomen's daughter. You stand between me and my lord and kin. Begone, if you be not deathless. For living or dark undead, I will smite you, if you touch him." A woman! The revelation was a flicker of surprise, a momentary disruption in the cold, monolithic certainty of my power, a glitch in the grand, unassailable logic of the prophecy. For 1,000 years, I had understood the words, "no living man," in their most direct and patriarchal sense, as was the way of the world. The race of men, their warriors, their kings, their heroes, they were the ones who mattered, the ones who could, in theory, pose a threat. Women, in my vast and ancient experience, were relegated to the roles of weeping widows in prizes of war. They were not a factor on the battlefield. The thought that the prophecy might hinge on such a fine point of language, a semantic trick, was absurd. And yet, the surprise was there. A momentary, fleeting question mark in the absolute statement of my own invincibility. But it was quickly suppressed. crushed by the sheer weight of my arrogance and the cold logic of my power. Man or woman, it mattered not. Flesh was flesh, fragile and easily broken. Bone could be shattered, blood could be spilled. The prophecy was the word of an elf, a creature of light who could not possibly comprehend the nuances of the true darkness. Perhaps it was a metaphor. Perhaps it was simply wrong. It did not matter. I was the Witch King. My will was supreme on this field of battle. This creature, this female of a lesser race, had dared to defy me. She would die, just as the man beside her would have died. I raised my great mace, a weapon so heavy that no mortal could have lifted it, let alone wielded it. Its dark iron head seemed to drink the very light from the air. I would bring it down upon her shield. The shield, made of wood and leather and flimsy hope, would splinter into 1,000 pieces. The blow would continue, shattering her arm, her shoulder, her skull. It would be a messy, brutal, and utterly final statement. It would be the end of this absurd and irritating interruption. My focus narrowed, the sounds of the greater battle fading into a distant hum. There was only me, the defiant woman, and the crushing blow that was about to fall. I savored the moment of her impending annihilation, the final, terrified widening of her eyes before the darkness took her. But as my arm tensed, as the killing blow began its inexorable descent, a searing agony, sharp and unbelievably cold, shot through my leg from behind. It was a pain unlike any I had ever known in my long, unliving existence. It was not the fleeting pain of a physical wound, but something deeper, a violation that struck at the very foundations of my being. I stumbled, my concentration shattered, a cry of pure, disbelieving agony escaping my unseen lips. The mace wavered in my grip. I turned, my black-robed form moving with a sudden, panicked speed, and there, cowering on the ground, his face a mask of terror and desperate resolve, was the hobbit. The ring-bearer's companion, the small creature I had barely noticed cowering near the fallen king. In his hand, he clutched a small sword, a dagger more than a blade. But as my wraith sight fell upon it, I saw it for what it was. A cold dread, a feeling I had not truly experienced in millennia, washed over me. The blade glowed with a faint, malevolent light in the shadow world. It was a blade of westerness, forged in the long-lost kingdom of Arnor in the north, during the wars against my own realm of Angmar. It was a barrow blade, steeped in spells laid by the Dunedain for the express purpose of bringing ruin to my master's servants, and most especially to me. He had stabbed me. This insignificant creature, this halfling, had driven a blade steeped in ancient targeted magic through the unseen sinews that bound my will to my physical manifestation. The defiance of the woman had been a distraction, a brave but foolish gesture. This was something else entirely. This was a poisoned dart, a sliver of ancient magic delivered by the most improbable of hands, slipping past the shield of prophecy, past the walls of my own arrogance. The blade was not just steel. As its ancient power coursed through me, I felt the spells of preservation, the filaments of my master's will that had held my form together for thousands of years, begin to snap. The connection to my physical being, the anchor that tied my consciousness to the world of the living, flickered and grew thin. The world, which I had long perceived as a realm of gray shadows, now seemed to waver, to lose its substance. The cold of the void, the true, ultimate nothingness that I served, which I had always held at bay through the sheer force of my will, now began to leak in, a chilling draft that promised utter dissolution. I was vulnerable. For the first time since the ring had consumed my mortal flesh, I felt a tremor of true, personal fear. It was not the strategic dread I inspired in others, but a cold, personal terror that coiled in the core of my being. The prophecy had not been a lie, but a riddle, and I had been too arrogant to see its true shape. My invulnerability was a fiction, a grand edifice built on a foundation of sand, and a hobbit's pinprick had brought it crashing down. With a roar of fury and terror, I lashed out at the hobbit, but my blow was clumsy, lacking its former focus. I turned back to the woman, Éowyn, and my perception of her had been irrevocably altered. I no longer saw a mortal woman of flesh and blood. In my wavering, failing sight, her form seemed to burn with an inner fire, a terrible and beautiful light. Her face, pale and determined, was no longer that of a defiant mortal, but of an avenging angel, an instrument of fate, her eyes burning with a cold fire that mirrored the intolerable light of the elf lord Glorfindel, the light I had fled from so long ago. She was my doom, made manifest in the most unexpected of forms. She raised her sword. It was a simple blade of mortal steel, yet now it seemed to shine with a borrowed radiance, a promise of utter finality. With a cry that was both a lament for her fallen king and a war chant of terrible vengeance, she stepped forward, past my weakened defense, and plunged the blade into the void, into the unseen space between my iron crown and my black mantle, into the nothingness where the head of the Witch-King of Angmar should have been. There was no physical sensation of the blade. There was only a final, cataclysmic severance. The remaining threads of my will, the last vestiges of the power that bound me to the world, were violently torn asunder. And then there was a sound. It was not a sound that could be heard by mortal ears, but a shriek that ripped through the fabric of both the seen and unseen worlds. It was a high, thin, unbearable cry that seemed to come from a vast and desolate distance, the sound of a spirit in its final agonizing dissolution, a cry of ultimate despair and utter defeat. My armor, the black plate that had inspired terror for centuries, clattered to the ground, suddenly empty. My crown, the symbol of my long-lost kingship and my current dark power, rolled in the mud, a hollow circlet of iron. My mantle, woven from shadow and fear, collapsed into a heap of lifeless black cloth. My form, the shadow, and the will that had been the Witch-King, the presence that had blighted the world for an age, was gone. It was scattered to the four winds, a gust of cold air across the blood-soaked field, a fading whisper on the wind, a final, shuddering exhalation of malice. The prophecy, in its cruel and literal irony, was fulfilled. Not by the hand of man had I fallen, but by a woman and a hobbit, a combination so wildly improbable, so utterly outside the realm of my long and arrogant calculations, that it was a final, bitter jest of fate, a testament to the fact that the grandest of plans, the most formidable of powers, can be undone by the things it deems too small to notice. My long reign was over. The kingdom of Angmar was a ghost, a distant memory in the lore of the vanquished. The terror of the Nazgûl, the 9 who had been the most feared servants of the Dark Lord, was broken. The war for Middle-earth would rage on for a few more desperate days, but its greatest captain, its most potent instrument of fear, was no more. My master, in his dark tower, would feel my passing as a physical blow, a gaping hole in the structure of his power. He would be defeated. His one ring, the source of my long unlife, and his own vast power, would be unmade in the fires where it was forged. His dark tower, his ambition, his very being would be cast down into ruin and utter nothingness. And I, who had been a great king of men, a sorcerer of renown, a student of the deep arts of the world, I, who had become the lord of the Nazgûl, a wraith of terrible and enduring power, I, the Witch-King of Angmar, was now nothing less than a ghost, a name and a story told by the victors, a shadow dispersed into the unforgiving light. A long and terrible winter, a winter of the spirit that had lasted for thousands of years, was finally, irrevocably, ended. My tale, should it be remembered, is a warning. It is a testament to the insidiously corrupting nature of power, to the seductive whisper of the dark that promises eternity but delivers only an empty, drawn-out oblivion. Remember me, not as the shrieking monster of the legends, not as the faceless terror on a winged beast, but as the man I once was. The proud king who sought to cheat the natural order, to rise above the humble fate of mortality. Remember that in my quest to escape the simple, honest end that awaits all men, I embraced a doom far more terrible, a dissolution far more complete than any mortal grave. Remember that even the greatest of wills, fortified by millennia of darkness and the power of a fallen god, can be broken. Remember that even the most formidable and all-consuming of shadows can be banished, not always by a great and shining hero, but sometimes by a single, unexpected flicker of light, held in the hands of the small and the forgotten.